Nights like these, quiet and empty, always felt strange. As an app driver, I was used to all kinds of people, from chatty to silent, but this particular night carried a heavy silence that seemed almost unnatural. Just as I was beginning to relax, my phone buzzed. A new fare request. It was an unfamiliar address, and something about the name on the app didn't sit right, though I couldn't say why. With a shrug, I accepted the ride, not knowing the eerie experience awaiting me. Upon arriving at the pickup point, there was no one in sight. Just as I thought the fare might be a no-show, a shadowy figure emerged from the darkness, slipping into the back seat with barely a sound. The figure muttered an address, but the voice was too faint to make out much detail. Something about the quiet demeanor made me uneasy, but I shrugged it off, attributing it to the late hour. The streetlights barely illuminated the road as we started our journey. Trying to ease the tension, I asked a few casual questions like, "Long night?" and "Are you from around here?" But each question was met with silence. Glancing in the rearview mirror, I noticed the passenger staring out the window, face obscured by shadows. Minutes passed, and the silence grew heavier. Glancing again in the mirror, I realized with a chill that I couldn't see the passenger's reflection. Confused, I blinked and adjusted the mirror, thinking it was a trick of the light or my tired eyes playing games. But the back seat remained empty in the reflection. Trying to shake off the unease, I focused on the road. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. Every now and then, I could hear faint sounds, like whispers or the soft rustle of clothing, even though the passenger remained utterly silent. The tension in the car was thick, almost suffocating. After what felt like an eternity, we reached the address. I parked the car and turned around to let the passenger know we had arrived. To my shock, the back seat was empty. My heart pounded as I stared, unsure if my mind was playing tricks or if I had somehow misremembered. Panic began to set in. I checked the time and then the app, but there was no record of the fare. No trip history, no payment, nothing. It was as though the passenger had never existed. My hands trembled as I scrolled through the app, desperately searching for any trace of the trip. Taking a deep breath, I decided to check the street around me. Maybe the passenger had quietly slipped out without my noticing. I stepped out of the car, looking left and right, but the street was deserted. Only the faint sound of crickets filled the air, an eerie reminder of the silence that had haunted the trip. Feeling the weight of dread settling on me, I got back into the car and locked the doors. The realization hit me hard. Whoever or whatever had been in my car wasn't a normal passenger. My mind raced, trying to make sense of what I had just experienced. I drove back, heart racing and hands shaking, replaying every moment in my mind. Had I really picked someone up? Or was it some strange, eerie coincidence? But I couldn't deny what I had felt. The chill, the silence, the presence that had filled the car. Back at the station, I told a fellow driver what happened. He listened, his face growing serious. Then he told me a similar story he'd heard from other drivers. Apparently, a few passengers had reported the same shadowy figure appearing at night, only to vanish before reaching the destination. The more I thought about it, the more I realized I wasn't the first to encounter this passenger. Stories from other drivers surfaced, each with small but chilling similarities. A pattern began to emerge, but no one could explain why it happened or what the figure wanted. Weeks went by, but the memory stayed with me, haunting my thoughts during every night shift. I avoided driving through that neighborhood and tried to forget the unsettling experience, but a nagging feeling lingered, a sense that I hadn't seen the last of my strange passenger. Eventually, the mystery became something I learned to live with. It wasn't something I could explain, and I doubted anyone else could either. Yet every so often, as I drove in the quiet of the night, I felt as if someone was there with me, unseen but watching. The last time I felt that presence was months later, driving through the same empty streets. Glancing in the mirror, I saw a brief glimpse of that shadowy figure once more, sitting silently in the back seat, before disappearing into the night. I never looked in that mirror again. It was nearing midnight on a lonely stretch of road outside Pine Ridge when my app buzzed, lighting up the dark interior of my car. The destination read Willow Pass, a place notorious for its isolation and eerie silence. I hesitated, wondering who could be waiting out there at this hour. Glancing around the empty road, I shrugged off my unease and accepted the ride, chalking up my nerves to a long day of work. After all, I'd had strange fares before. The drive to Willow Pass felt endless, the silence around me amplifying every creak and whisper of the night. No streetlights illuminated the road, leaving only my headlights to slice through the heavy darkness. A faint mist began to roll in, thickening the air and blurring my vision. Something about this route felt different, almost as if the night itself was closing in. When I arrived, a figure stood by the roadside, barely visible in the mist. The person seemed out of place, almost ghostly, wearing dark clothing that blended into the shadows. Without a word, they opened the back door and slid into the seat. My greeting went unanswered, but I didn't press, sensing a heavy silence from the passenger. As I began to drive, the air inside the car grew colder. I glanced at the passenger in the rearview mirror, trying to catch a glimpse of their face, but shadows obscured every feature. An uneasy feeling gnawed at me, urging me to ask where they were headed, but I stayed quiet, hoping the ride would end soon. The mist thickened as we traveled, swallowing the road in a blanket of fog. Suddenly, the passenger's voice cut through the silence, asking to stop on a desolate stretch of road. Startled, I nodded and pulled over, my heartbeat quickening as they opened the door and stepped out into the night without a word. I watched them walk into the fog, their silhouette fading into the shadows. A strange chill lingered in the air, as if they had left something behind. Waiting a moment, I checked the app to confirm the ride was completed, only to find the screen blank. There was no record of the fare, no proof that anyone had been there. My pulse quickened as I scrolled through the ride history, searching for any trace of the passenger. The address, the route, even the pickup point, all gone. Desperation clawed at me, trying to make sense of the situation. Had I imagined the entire ride? Shaking my head, I decided to return to the exact spot where I had picked them up. Maybe I missed something, a detail that would explain the strange experience. But as I reached the location, the mist cleared slightly, revealing an old, faded cross by the roadside. Curiosity pulled me closer to the cross, where faded flowers and a name carved into the wood were visible. It marked the place of a tragic accident from years ago, a life lost on this very road. A chill ran down my spine as I realized the passenger might not have been alive at all. Heart racing, I backed away from the cross, the weight of the realization sinking in. Memories of the silent, shadowy figure replayed in my mind, each detail amplifying the fear building within me. I had driven a spirit, a lost soul. Desperation urged me to leave the area, and I quickly got back into the car. The thought of staying near that place, that cross, sent a wave of dread through me. My hands shook as I started the engine, eager to leave it all behind. As I drove away, my thoughts were a chaotic swirl of fear and confusion. Why had the app led me to such a place? Who or what had been in my car that night? Questions burned in my mind, but no answers seemed within reach. Days passed, yet the memory of that night haunted me. Every time I drove past a deserted road, the chill returned, and I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. I knew I wouldn't forget this fare. Eventually, I shared the story with a few close friends, each one listening in stunned silence. They suggested it was a trick of the mind or a prank, but deep down, I knew the truth. Something supernatural had crossed my path that night. Since that night, I've avoided Willow Pass, unwilling to tempt fate again. But even now, in the quiet moments on empty roads, I feel that chill return, a reminder that not every passenger is from this world. On a cold, foggy night in Ashford, I got an unexpected ride request near a secluded area of town called Briarwood Lane. The street was barely lit, shrouded in dense fog, and I hesitated, but something pushed me to accept. As I approached the location, the faint streetlight illuminated a lone figure standing motionless, blending almost eerily into the mist. Her name on the app was Isabella. Dressed in a long, dark coat, she looked out of place, as if she'd stepped out of a different time. Isabella slipped into the back seat without saying a word, her presence instantly filling the car with an unsettling chill. I glanced in the rearview mirror, but her eyes were fixed on something unseen outside the window. Silence filled the car as I drove through Ashford's quiet streets. the only sound coming from the rain tapping against the windows. Isabella didn't speak, didn't glance around. She seemed completely absorbed in her own world. Every few minutes I found myself glancing back, hoping she might explain, but nothing broke the heavy silence between us. Attempting to break the silence, I casually asked if she was from Ashford. Isabella's response was barely a nod, her lips moving slightly as if whispering something to herself. The words were too quiet to hear, drowned by the rain. The feeling that something was amiss crept into my mind, making my hands grip the steering wheel tighter. Halfway down Briarwood Lane, Isabella whispered, "Turn left here." The direction led us onto an even darker, more isolated road, one I'd never driven before. With each passing second, the surroundings grew stranger, like a place lost in time. Fog thickened around us and my heart raced, yet something compelled me to continue. Eventually, the car's headlights revealed an old, abandoned house at the end of the road. The building looked like it had been untouched for decades, with broken windows and vines crawling up the walls. Isabella simply said, "Wait for me here," in a voice so soft it was barely audible. She slipped out of the car and disappeared into the darkness. Curiosity and concern gnawed at me as I sat in silence, watching the fog swallow her figure. Minutes passed, each one more unsettling than the last. The oppressive silence pressed down on me, and I checked my phone for the ride's details, hoping for a distraction. But when I looked at the app, her ride request was gone. My pulse quickened. Trying to remain calm, I reasoned that it was likely just a glitch. Yet, unease took root, twisting in my gut. I waited a few more minutes, glancing at the house, half expecting her to reappear. The mist grew thicker, almost alive, and the house seemed to fade in and out of view as if it were breathing. Moments later, a figure appeared from the shadows, but it wasn't Isabella. An older man in tattered clothes emerged, his expression blank and cold, as if he didn't see me at all. My body froze as he passed right by the car, vanishing into the mist without a sound. The night air grew colder, wrapping me in a chilling grip. Seconds later, I thought I saw Isabella's shadow by the window, but when I turned, she was gone. Panic flooded my veins as I started the engine, ready to leave. But just as I hit the gas, a hand pressed against the outside of my window, pale and ghostly, belonging to no one in sight. The sight made my heart nearly stop. Frantically, I sped away from the house, my mind racing with fear and disbelief. The road ahead was barely visible, shrouded in thick fog, but I didn't dare look back. The ominous silence from that strange night haunted me as I left Briarwood Lane, determined to never return. Once safely home, I checked the app again, finding no record of the ride request or Isabella. She had vanished, like a ghost fading from existence. The police dismissed my story, claiming it was likely a prank, but deep down, I knew something sinister lingered on that deserted road. On a dark, rainy night in Chicago, Ben got a late-night ride request. He wasn't eager to accept at first, but the destination was just a few miles away from the airport, which usually meant a quick fare. As he approached the pickup location, he noticed a man standing under a flickering streetlight, clutching a large, worn-out suitcase. The man's face was hidden under a hood, and there was something unsettling about his rigid stance. Without a word, the man slid into the back seat, dragging the suitcase beside him. The silence was thick, and Ben couldn't shake the unease that settled over him. He glanced in the rearview mirror, noticing the man's hands gripping the suitcase tightly, as if he feared it might be taken from him. After a few minutes, Ben attempted small talk, asking if the man was headed somewhere for business. The only response was a slight nod and a mumbled, "Keep driving." A strange smell began to fill the car, faint but unpleasant. Ben tried to ignore it, thinking it might be the rain mixing with the car's old upholstery. However, the odor grew stronger, almost metallic, and his curiosity got the better of him. He asked if everything was all right, hinting at the suitcase. The man stiffened, his voice sharp. "Just drive. Don't ask questions." The suitcase began to leak a dark, sticky substance, staining the seat. Ben's anxiety spiked, but he forced himself to focus on the road. He noticed the man's breathing become erratic as he held the suitcase even tighter, almost protectively. The route took them down unfamiliar streets, away from the usual paths leading to the airport. Ben's hands gripped the wheel harder, feeling the tension build. In a low voice, Ben asked if he could roll down the windows, hoping the air might dilute the stench. The man muttered, "No." Something about the way he said it sent a chill down Ben's spine. He realized this wasn't just a difficult passenger. There was something deeply wrong. His mind raced with thoughts. He considered pulling over, but fear kept him moving forward. The GPS directed them toward an abandoned area of the city, full of vacant buildings and empty lots. Ben's unease grew with each mile, the dark streets seeming to close in on them. They finally stopped near an old factory, its windows shattered and graffiti-covered walls looming ominously in the shadows. The man instructed, "Wait here, I'll be back soon." Watching him disappear into the darkness, Ben's heart pounded. Minutes passed, and the silence around him grew heavier. Unable to bear the tension, he decided to call the number listed on the app. The phone rang, but what he heard on the other end sent shivers through him. Static, mixed with faint whispers like voices coming from a distance. Desperation gnawed at him as he tried again, only to hear the same unsettling noise. The factory loomed in the darkness, silent and foreboding. Ben glanced at the suitcase, still leaking its dark substance onto the seat. Unable to resist, he reached back, hesitating before lifting the edge of the suitcase slightly, revealing a red-stained fabric inside. Suddenly, footsteps echoed from the direction of the factory, and Ben quickly released the suitcase. The man emerged from the shadows, his face expressionless as he got back into the car. Without a word, he demanded to be dropped off at an address on the other side of town, far from where they were. The air inside the car felt colder as Ben resumed driving. Silence filled the car again, heavier than before. Ben couldn't shake the dread creeping over him, his thoughts fixated on the suitcase's contents. At a red light, he considered asking more questions but decided against it, sensing it would only escalate things. As they approached the final destination, he just wanted the man out of his car. Arriving at the requested address, a dilapidated building in another desolate part of town, the man got out, leaving the suitcase behind. Ben froze, unsure if he should say something. Before he could react, the man disappeared into the shadows without a backward glance, leaving the eerie silence lingering in his wake. Nervously, Ben got out of the car, staring at the suitcase, debating whether to open it or call the authorities. The memory of the red-stained fabric haunted him, but curiosity gnawed at his resolve. His hand shook as he reached for the zipper, but before he could pull it, a shadow moved nearby, sending him stumbling back in fear. Quickly jumping back into his car, Ben dialed the police, explaining the strange encounter and the suitcase. Officers arrived soon after, and with careful precision, opened the suitcase. Inside, they found blood-stained clothes and mysterious documents, but no clue as to the man's identity. The police took the evidence, leaving Ben with an eerie feeling of unease. The following days, Ben couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched. At home, on his usual routes, even during new rides, there was a constant, unsettling awareness, as if someone's eyes were always on him. Each night, he double-checked his locks, convinced that shadows lingered outside his window, reminding him of the encounter. One evening, he received a message on his Rideshare app. "Thank you for the ride." No profile photo, no name, just the message. His blood ran cold as he realized the message was from the man he thought he'd left behind. Paralyzed with fear, he closed the app and sat in silence, unable to escape the haunting realization that his strange passenger was still out there, watching, waiting.